The 3rd month after I separated from my sugar daddy, he ran into me on a European street, just as I was coming out of the hospital with one hand supporting my pregnant belly. Ambitious, the man commented coldly, but too stupid. He had his assistant pass along a message, tossed me a card, and ordered me to get rid of the child. President Law will not be manipulated by a child, and the Law family will not open its doors to you because of a bastard. I hope you know your place and don't entertain any ulterior motives. I declined the card and smiled faintly. You've misunderstood. This is my husband's child. We got married 2 months ago. It has absolutely nothing to do with President Law. Chapter 1. London's winter is always damp and bleak. The wind on the streets stung my face for no reason at all. Assistant Lin, standing in front of me, showed no real change in expression after hearing my words. He merely put on a look of mild surprise and said, "Is that so?" Having stayed by Berlin Law's side for many years, he had grown increasingly adept at reading people. Those eyes behind the lenses swept over my lower abdomen, and he asked politely, "How many weeks pregnant is Miss Chan?" "Around 12 weeks. He gave a slight nod, his face still wearing that gentle yet distant smile. "Then the timing is a little too coincidental with when you left President Law." As Berlin's most trusted assistant, he had seen far too many women who would stop at nothing just to stay by Berlin's side. I lowered my head and pulled out my phone. "I have photos of my wedding with my husband." But he interrupted me courteously. "That doesn't prove anything. President Law is very sensitive about illegitimate children. I hope Miss Chan understands this. Otherwise, President Law wouldn't mind sending you to an abortion table for the 2nd time." My fingers stiffened around the phone, and I lifted my gaze slightly. The first snow of the year drifted down slowly, through the floor-to-ceiling window of the high-rise. I met the man's dark, cold eyes. He was looking down at me from above, scrutinizing me, perhaps waiting for me to be caught again. Pale-faced and humiliated, he was used to being the one in control, and my pregnancy was undoubtedly another challenge to his bottom line. I put my phone away, took a deep breath, and turned to Assistant Lin. "Please pass this on to Mr. Law. I won't make the same mistake a 2nd time." My tone was calm as I spoke seriously. I have no obsession with the child I aborted back then, nor do I have any intention of climbing the social ladder through a child or fighting over family assets. This truly is nothing more than my husband's child. Chapter 2. I really had been pregnant with Berlin's child once. That was the 6th year I had stayed by his side. A small life, bound to me by blood, took root in my womb and miraculously reignited my passion for living. At 17, I had left my hometown to head north in order to repay my father's gambling debts. After that, I spent several years in the gaudy, intoxicated world of nightclubs. Working as a drinking companion, my life rose and fell in turmoil, and there were hardly any family members around me, let alone friends. That was the first time I had been so bold. I hid it from Berlin, intending to keep the child, until one night at a business dinner, when I drank on his behalf and ended up vomiting several times. A woman brought by one of the vice presidents joked about whether I was pregnant. I saw it clearly. Berlin's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, and his sharp, scrutinizing gaze landed on my lower abdomen. He never allowed any accidents in his life. This sudden child stepped on every one of his red lines. What was worse, I had hidden it from him for so long. That was the first time he lost his temper with me, grinding his teeth with sarcasm in his voice. "So I underestimated you, Melissa. You're quite capable." With a cold face, he threw me out of the villa and left me with a final warning. "I'll give you one night to reflect. If you still can't recognize your place, pack up and get lost as soon as possible." It snowed that night. The bone-chilling wind cut into my face. I looked out at the vast stretch of white in the distance, touched my slightly swollen belly, and let out a soft breath with reddened eyes. The tension that had bound my nerves for 3 months finally loosened. Maybe this wasn't entirely a bad thing. I tried to think lightly. I was probably the only one among his many mistresses who didn't get a breakup payout and instead managed to anger him. By then, the fetus was already 12 weeks along. A forced abortion could cause cervical tearing. On top of that, I had been drinking for years, and my body was too weak. The doctor said that if I terminated the pregnancy, I might never be able to have children again for the rest of my life. But the man simply stubbed out his cigarette. His dark eyes were calm and indifferent as he replied flatly, "And what does that have to do with me? In our circle, Raising an illegitimate child was never a difficult matter. Even his aloof, high and mighty friends half-jokingly tried to persuade him, why not give birth and send the child abroad to be raised? After all, you're already in your 30s. You've only had her by your side all these years. Having a child wouldn't be a bad thing. Berlin said nothing. After several rounds of drinks, someone, already drunk, teased him. Come on, Berlin. You've kept her around for so many years. Are you really going to say you never felt anything genuine? Someone else probed cautiously. Don't tell me you're still thinking about Undine? For that goddess who had gone abroad in her youth and vanished without a trace. Berlin merely cast a cold glance. It has nothing to do with her. When the topic returned to me, he answered carelessly. She looks pleasant enough. I just kept her a few extra years. A bottom-tier nightclub hostess was only fit to be a mistress, not a wife. A child of such lowly status he would never want. From beginning to end, I was very well behaved. On the day I went to the hospital, I didn't shed a single tear. Later, I nearly died on the operating table from massive hemorrhaging. I stayed in the ICU for several weeks before I forced myself through it. On the day I was discharged, he unusually postponed a meeting to come see me. The man stood there in a sharp, dark overcoat, his gaze cold and heavy as he made himself as clear as possible. Melissa, I will never marry you. I will only have a legitimate heir, not some illegitimate child who can't be shown in public. I slowly pressed my pale lips together and smiled faintly at him. I know, that was what he liked most about me. I knew my place. I was sensible, obedient enough. Outside, snow fell in rustling sheets, the howling wind battering against the tightly sealed glass windows. From 17 to 27, I suddenly realized this was the 10th year of snow I had seen in Kyoto. A woman's most beautiful years had all been spent here, perhaps because my attitude in admitting fault was good, and because I had just walked through the gates of death. He didn't pursue the matter further. The private hospital room was warm. The cold severity in the man's brows gradually softened as he picked up an apple and began to peel it. I had my assistant pick out some bags and jewelry for you. They'll be sent to your place in a while. I quietly watched the long, curling strip of apple peel. Moisture welled up in my aching eyes, but I forced it back down. There was still snow clinging to the man's long lashes. His expression was cool and focused, his movements meticulous. You'll only be with me for these few years. Once I enter a political marriage, I'll naturally let you go. He sliced the apple and brought it to my lips, lowering his voice for once as he coaxed me. Melissa, be good. I won't treat you unfairly. HM? Chapter 3. He truly did not mistreat me. During the 10 years I stayed by his side, those were indeed the most glamorous and triumphant moments of my life. Even when Undine finally appeared, he never once let me feel humiliated. I brushed the snow from my shoulder and said to Assistant Lin, to put Mr. Law at ease, I'll go for a prenatal paternity test in a couple of days. Then please let me know when the time comes. Miss Chan, I'll accompany you, he replied. It was obvious he was worried I might try to fool them with a fake result. I nodded. That's fine. He smiled and handed me his business card, not forgetting to warn me as well. If Miss Chan needs anything, you can contact me. President Law is preparing to get married. I hope Miss Chan knows her boundaries. The future Mrs. Law is very sensitive about such matters. In fact, there was no need to worry. Before I left, I had already deleted all of Berlin Law's contact information, changed my phone number and private messaging account, and even sold the residence he had arranged for me. If it weren't for today's chance encounter on the street, I think we probably would never have crossed paths again in this lifetime. And the future Mrs. Law was most likely that goddess of his who had just returned to the country. I forced a smile and nodded. Then I wish Mr. Law a happy marriage. Snow drifted thickly from the sky. I buried my face in my scarf, turned around, and walked alone toward home along the snow-covered street. That dark, heavy gaze from the high-rise continued to follow me. Many years ago, on a snowy night, when he carried me through the streets while I was drunk, he had made it very clear that he would only enter a marriage of alliance. Any relationship that could not produce tangible value was merely a disposable phase. He demanded matching families and compatible social classes to maximize interest. Keeping me was nothing more than a clearly priced transaction. I stayed sober even as I sank deeper. But only today did I suddenly realize, principles are set for people like us. substitutes. And the goddess exists beyond those principles. Even if she had nothing at all, she would still receive his favor. Chapter 4. No one knew why this goddess, who had gone abroad in her youth and vanished without a trace, suddenly reappeared. But I knew. I once had an absurd dream. In the dream, she was the conqueror. After fully maxing out Berlin's affection points, she returned to her original world. There, she got married and had a child. But because of a difficult life and a cheating husband, she chose to return to Berlin's side, to test whether Berlin still loved her. Before I left, she specifically requested to meet me once. In the cafe, the woman wore a white dress, no makeup on her face, quietly sizing up my clothes and appearance. Although she tried hard to resemble the pure, clean girl she once was in her youth, the fatigue and calculation in her eyes could not be concealed. In contrast, I had been well nourished by money. My whole body carried a languid, tranquil air, the kind of calm that comes from not worrying about making a living. This stirred in her an unspoken resentment. She asked me only 3 questions. How long have you been together? Or rather, how long have you stayed by his side? Holding my coffee cup, I answered slowly and clearly. 9 years and 6 months. In the 7th year I stayed with Berlin. We had been out of contact for half a year. Some said he was preparing for a marriage of alliance. Others said he had found a substitute who resembled her even more. Just when I thought this relationship was going to end cleanly, Assistant Lin suddenly contacted me one day, after a night of intense intimacy. He tacitly allowed me to occupy the most important place by his side, and there was no one else around him anymore. The woman sitting across from me looked displeased. She didn't want to hear such a precise timeline, but she still forced a smile, pretending not to care. So long already? Then, did you sleep together? That was her second question. I froze for a moment. She quickly realized herself how ridiculous the question sounded. After all, it had been 10 years, and Berlin was a normal man. It was impossible for him to have no desire at all. But I didn't mind telling her something she wanted to hear. For the first 5 years, no, Berlin really had waited for her, as if she had finally confirmed her weight in Berlin's heart. She let out a relieved breath. Her smile gained a hint of genuine warmth as she complained softly. I see. Then I just came back too late. She immediately followed up with the last question. Then when you do it, do you kiss? Chapter 5. Kissing and caressing should belong exclusively to lovers. She needed that fact desperately. As proof, in the stagnant air, she stared intently at my face, watching for the slightest change in expression. For a brief moment, I felt dazed, then answered quickly, no. The tension in her fingers suddenly eased. All her anxiety and unease receded like a tide. In its place appeared the lightness and smug satisfaction of a victor. Good, then I understand, she said. These years. Thank you for taking care of Berlin. At last. She put on a generous smile, assuming the posture of the rightful one. There was even a hint of intimate complaint in her tone. He's cold by nature and doesn't really know how to care for people. You must have suffered quite a bit. I didn't deny it. I simply murmured a soft mem, because I had long imagined this day. I felt no great emotional upheaval. In the nightlife scene, I had seen too many infatuated girls who believed that staying long enough would earn them legitimacy, only to end up tearing things apart, then being warned off by the lawful wife. I thought that, as a substitute who could never see the light of day, I was already lucky enough. However, I lied to her a little. Berlin was not averse to kissing, especially when a single kiss could resolve an emotion. He wouldn't waste time or money pondering it. Occasionally, when satisfied, he would casually pull me into his arms and plant a careless peck. It wasn't exactly heartfelt, but moments like that, tinged with a bit of warmth, always gave me the illusion that he and I were just an ordinary couple. You see, women are always moved by such trivial, everyday details, and in the end willingly sink into them. Even I was no exception. Chapter 6. Winter nights always fall quickly. When I got home, the nanny brought out a small plate of black truffle mushroom pasta with a mysterious look on her face. She said it was a new experiment and hoped for my approval. I froze for a moment. After a pause, I smiled and gently pushed it away. I don't like pasta. My husband had gone abroad on a business trip for further training. Afraid I wouldn't take good care of myself, He hired a live-in cook for me, because she hadn't figured out my preferences yet. The nanny looked a little embarrassed and said she would make something else instead. The living room fell quiet, the bright moon hanging high outside the window. The crisp yet rich aroma of black truffle drifted through the air, forcefully dragging my memories back to the past. Back then, young and reckless, the days and nights blurred together. After my strength was spent, I was always hungry. That was the first time I stayed overnight at his place. The villa was enormous, yet there was no stock of instant food. In my early years, all my time had gone into figuring out how to please my boss and earn more tips. Dinner was always something hastily dealt with. I didn't know how to cook, let alone use the utensils in his kitchen. I could only rummage through the cupboards for bread, then hide on the sofa and gnaw at it. Perhaps Berlin was in a good mood that night, seeing how pitifully hungry I looked. He unexpectedly turned and went into the kitchen. I waited until I was nearly dozing off. When I hazily opened my eyes, all I saw was the dim yellow glow of the living room, and the refined, languid man wearing the same loungewear as me, walking toward me step by step through the light and shadow. His long, elegant fingers pushed the pasta toward me, his voice teasing, "Try it." Many times afterward, whenever I saw black truffles, I would think of that bowl of pasta. These small things, again and again, dragged me back into that gentle yet merciless web. I clenched my palm tightly. If I wanted to completely peel myself away, then I could no longer touch anything tied to those memories. Chapter 7. On Monday, I took a hair sample from my husband, sealed it in a transparent bag, and slipped it into my handbag. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw not only Assistant Lynn, but Undine as well. Compared to her plain appearance that day, she looked far more luxurious now. She carried the latest designer handbag in her hand. Heavy makeup smoothed away the flaws on her face, and even the fatigue in her eyes had vanished completely. Money truly is the most nourishing supplement for a woman. My steps paused slightly as I gave a small nod. "Miss Chi." She didn't respond. The arrogance and displeasure on her face were barely concealed as she openly sized up my pregnant belly. As the atmosphere grew subtle, Assistant Lynn spoke respectfully. Our madam wasn't at ease and came along to take a look. "If Miss Chan has nothing to hide, I trust you won't mind." I clenched my fingers and smiled. "Of course not. Madam has also prepared a hair sample from President Law. Testing both together will make the results more credible." He was thorough. I had no objections and handed over the transparent bag. Chapter 8. After having my blood drawn and leaving the hospital, the snow had stopped and the sky was clear. Dazzling sunlight reflected off a low-key yet luxurious black sedan. The man leaned against the car door, his side profile sharp and cold. Long fingers held a cigarette as if he were waiting for someone, impatience already showing between his brows. 3 months had passed, yet he hadn't changed much, and I had already completed the most important matter of my life. I intended to leave quietly, but the next second, the man lifted his eyelids, and his gaze locked onto me. People passed by all around us, yet instinctively made way for this lofty, aloof figure. I had no choice but to meet his eyes and offer a polite smile. "Mr. Law." "What a coincidence." "Not a coincidence," he said, lowering his gaze. His mocking eyes swept over my slightly rounded belly. "Seems the last lesson wasn't harsh enough. If it made you think you could use the same trick again." I tried to explain. "No, you've misunderstood." He cut me off. "Misunderstood?" As if he had heard a crude joke, he repeated the word with ridicule. "Timing, motive, you've got them all. And you're telling me it's a misunderstanding?" He flicked away the cigarette butt. His polished shoes stepped onto the damp, cold ground as he advanced toward me step by step. "Leaving me for 3 months and just happening to be 12 weeks pregnant? Tell me, what kind of man is so capable that he could get you to throw yourself into a new life so quickly? Even rush to have a child?" The words were vicious, the deduction perfectly logical. For a moment, I was left speechless. "Melissa, you stayed by my side for 10 years. You should have learned to be smarter by now. Don't use such stupid methods, and don't force me to exhaust the last shred of affection I have." He judged me from above, every word as cold and sharp as a blade. He was always like this, arrogant, confident, measuring everything by his own logic. The arrival of this child had once again stepped on his landmines. The restless sunlight couldn't melt even a trace of the chill, I let out a deep breath, no longer wanting to make futile explanations. I lifted my head and, for the first time, looked at him calmly and seriously, no longer addressing him politely as Mr. Law. Berlin. My voice was light, yet clear enough. Do you really think that my life has no other choices besides you? Finding a suitable person to marry and having a lovely child is itself part of my life plan. Besides, the report isn't even out yet. Why are you sentencing me now? Miss clouded my eyes as I asked in a soft yet stubborn tone. Why don't you believe me, Berlin? He looked at me in silence, the coldness in his eyes undiminished, until tears slid from the corners of my eyes and fell onto his expensive handmade leather shoes. The long fingers at his side twitched unconsciously. He pressed his lips together and looked away. Showing weakness had always worked on him. I knew my advantage very well. He stepped back in silence, widening the distance between us. After a moment, his gaze darkened, warning laced in his voice. Melissa, you'd better be able to guarantee that what you said is true. Of course, I replied calmly. When the report comes out in a week, Mr. Law will receive a satisfactory answer. The man stared at my retreating figure, his icy gaze growing complicated and unreadable. A satisfactory answer? A strange emotion suddenly rose in his chest. Was it his, or was it not? An unnamed restlessness wound tightly around his heart. Only then did he realize, no matter what the answer was, he wouldn't be satisfied. Chapter 9. Everyone thought I was trying to climb my way up through a child. But in truth, I never had that much ambition for fame or status. In my early years, the only thing on my mind was probably how to stay by Berlin's side a little longer. People like to use light as a metaphor for salvation and love. So in my early 20s, I liked to call Berlin my light, the only redemption in my debauched, decaying life. I even harbored the despicable thought of squeezing out all the women around him, becoming the only one who stayed by his side. You might think I was ridiculous, but you should understand this. The year I met him, I had just turned 20. He paid off my father's gambling debts for me, dealt with the gangsters who had been hounding me for repayment day after day, and even gave me the chance to continue my university education. I think that no matter who it was, placed in such circumstances, they would probably sink into it beyond saving. So after I graduated, I willingly stayed by his side. I accompanied him to countless business dinners and negotiations, helping him block one strong drink after another. He didn't actually like alcohol. Aside from occasions where drinking was unavoidable, he never touched it. Everything else was taken on by me. Back then, I always hoped I could stay by his side for a few more years. So every time the liquor burned its way down my throat, I said nothing, and still smiled sweetly at him. When I received his approving glance, I would blush, and my heart would pound wildly just from leaning against his shoulder under the cover of drunkenness. There were always many women around him. Some were needed for social occasions, others were arranged by his family, but most of them never lasted more than 3 months. I forced my way into staying by his side year after year, relying solely on my ability to drink. The longer I stayed with him, the more clearly I understood the gap between us. He would never marry me. He used to say that often. Later, he didn't need to say it anymore. I already knew. Since I had chosen a shortcut, I had no right to complain about the thorns along the way. The gulf between social classes was like an insurmountable chasm. I was very clear about that. So he was never my chosen partner for marriage in the first place. Chapter 10. The day the results came out was a Friday. As agreed, I went to the hospital. Assistant Lynn collected the report and took me to a nearby restaurant. Undine had already been waiting there for quite some time, looking exceptionally composed. Just as I was about to open the report, Assistant Lynn pressed down on my wrist, a distant yet polite smile on his face. Since Miss Chan is so confident about the results, why not let our madam reveal them instead? A faint sense of unease rose in me. The corners of Undine's lips curved upward. It was as if she had already seen through everything and was simply here to collect the answer. After opening the report and giving it a quick glance, she neatly tossed Berlin's copy onto the table. Care to explain? Miss Chan? Berlin hates being lied to, especially when it comes to children. My gaze dropped. The bold words on the page were unmistakable. 99% confirmed biological relationship. When I saw this absurd conclusion, my heart inevitably clenched. Assistant Lin tactfully withdrew, leaving the space to the two of us. I was stunned for a brief moment, then picked up the report and read it over several times. Seeing this, Undine grew smug and couldn't help but sneer. Miss Chan, not saying anything? Thinking about how to make up another lie? I understand wanting to climb the social ladder, but Berlin and I are about to get married. Pulling out an illegitimate child now, who exactly are you trying to disgust? I understood it almost instantly. No wonder she had been so confident about the result. So she had tampered with it long ago. Perhaps I looked too obedient, and being younger than her made me seem easy to control. But those years I spent in the nightlife scene weren't for nothing. Later, following Berlin to countless business dinners, I'd heard more than enough dirty tricks about climbing to the top. Every sample that day had passed through her hands and Assistant Lin's. Even an idiot could see something was wrong. I tossed the report back in front of her and said with pity, Undine, you're really afraid of me. The smile on her face froze. I leaned closer, letting out a knowing laugh. You know perfectly well this child isn't Berlin's, but you still want to nail it down as his, don't you? Her eyes widened in shock. She was about to retort, but my next sentence cut her off. You went to all this trouble just to let Berlin see irrefutable evidence, didn't you? To make him firmly believe that I, Melissa, am a shameless woman who refuses to change, trying to cling to him with a bastard, so that whatever little old affection and guilt he has left toward me will turn completely into disgust and rage. Her face instantly turned ashen, her voice rising sharply. What nonsense are you spouting? What schemes have I plotted? The mocking curve of my lips grew wider as I continued to expose the thoughts she believed were well hidden. You want him to personally push me away. That's the only way to eliminate future trouble. Because you understand better than anyone how much Berlin loathes illegitimate children and how much he values bloodlines. So you handed him the one reason he could never forgive me. Yes, her greatest fear was never the child. It was the lingering, uncertain old feelings in Berlin's heart. She had to extinguish that spark with her own hands. 10 years. That was 5 times longer than the 2 years she spent saving Berlin. How could she not be afraid? She suddenly stood up, slammed the report onto the table, and snapped in desperation. This is the truth now. I've already sent the report to him. Berlin will only believe this, no matter what you say. He'll think you're lying, deceiving him. I laughed indifferently, sat back on the sofa, and asked calmly, you think your weight in his heart is that great? That's 10 years. Undine. The more frightened she was, the more precisely I stabbed where it hurt. 10 years you can never erase, no matter what you do. She was completely enraged now. Every word was squeezed out through clenched teeth as she shouted. Melissa, you're the one who was never loved, do you understand? So what if it was 10 years? If I hadn't left? How would someone like you, fresh out of the nightlife, have ever gotten the chance to serve Berlin law? Can you even count how many men you've slept with? You got to enjoy 10 years of a law wife's privileges for free. Pretending to be upper class for so long, did you really forget who you are? I neither confirmed nor denied it, just tilted my head and smiled. What? Miss Chi, are you jealous? She let out a cold laugh. Jealous? Ha, what would I be jealous of? He just treated you as a toy to pass the time. Oh, right, didn't you get pregnant with Berlin's child back then? Did he want it? And this one now. She suddenly reached out, almost poking my belly, her face filled with extreme malice and ridicule. You think it'll be any different? I'm telling you, even if this really were Berlin's, once it's born it would still be a bastard that can never see the light of day. Just like you, pointed at and cursed behind its back for a lifetime. A filthy little bastard born of trash. My expression finally went completely cold. I stood up abruptly, grabbed the coffee beside me, and hurled it straight into her face. Chapter 11. Berlin appeared at that very moment. He walked in and, at a single glance, saw Undine, her face smeared with coffee, utterly disheveled, shivering and crying. He didn't even need a second to judge the situation. The man's expression was calm and indifferent, but his eyes were dark and razor sharp. He picked up a full glass of ice water from the table and poured it straight down over my head, without the slightest deviation. Clean. Decisive, without hesitation. Have you caused enough trouble? His voice carried not a hint of emotion, yet the cold in his tone pierced straight to the bone. Ice water slid down from my hair, along my face, and into my collar. The biting cold made me tremble uncontrollably. I closed my eyes, and in a daze, memories surfaced from the first year I stayed by his side. There had been a scene like this back then, too. The first time he took me to a business dinner to negotiate a deal. I was so nervous that when I poured wine, I accidentally soaked the cuff of a CEO's shirt. He had calmly stood up, and in front of the entire table, poured a whole bottle of liquor over my head. Using that same flat tone, he reprimanded me. Lost your tongue? Why aren't you apologizing to President Shin? But this time was different from 10 years ago. In this moment, I felt no resentment, no indignation, only something laughable. So laughable it was bitterly ironic. Laughable enough that tears almost spilled from the corners of my eyes. I struggled to hold back my burning, reddened gaze and met his condescending stare. I spoke hoarsely, my voice trembling, enunciating every word clearly, without emotion, as if stating a fact. Berlin, I have never done anything to wrong you. Not once. For 10 years, I obeyed you in everything. You told me to drink for you, so I drank even if it meant vomiting blood and being hospitalized. I never refused. You told me to please someone, and I went even when they groped me and took advantage. I never resisted. You told me to abort the child, and I did even if it meant dying on the operating table. I didn't hesitate for a second. Wasn't I obedient enough? Berlin? I questioned him, my eyes red to the rims. Then why did you treat me like this? His gaze darkened. He said nothing. I forced a smile with great effort, tears spilling uncontrollably from the corners of my eyes. I was always very well behaved. I never caused you any trouble. When we broke up, I left cleanly, asked for nothing, cut off every possibility of contacting you. I even sincerely hoped you would live happily. My throat tightened so badly that for a moment I couldn't continue. I only stared at him stubbornly, as if begging for an answer. But why did you treat me like this? Berlin? Over all these years, I had rarely cried in front of him, very rarely. The man's pitch-black pupils fixed on me, his Adam's apple rolling almost imperceptibly. Scalding tears poured from my eyes and splashed onto the floor, as if they had struck his heart, burning so fiercely that even the tip of his heart trembled. The fingers hanging at his side clenched unconsciously. Just moments ago, he had lifted that glass of ice water so effortlessly, yet now, it felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. So heavy he could barely raise his hand. He had been through countless meetings that decided the life or death of companies. Yet this was the first time he didn't know how to speak. His cold, rigid gaze remained fixed on the tear tracks on my face, unable to move away for a long time. His silence finally shattered the last shred of my reason. I completely lost control, breaking down as I cried out. Why? Why are you all insisting on disturbing my life? Why do you make arbitrary judgments that this child must be yours? Why must you force me into a corner where I can't even prove my own innocence? He suddenly spoke. Because we slept together that night. Undine, standing nearby, covered her face, disbelief written all over it. She probably never imagined that on the very night her flight landed, Berlin's body was still entwined with mine. Her face turned deathly pale as she lunged forward, trying to question Berlin about what had happened, only to be shoved aside with disgust by him. Chapter 12. I suddenly laughed, laughing through my tears. So that's the only reason? Berlin, when do we not sleep together? You can count on one hand the number of times you actually wore protection. We lived like that for years. Why would you think that one time would be enough to get me pregnant? His jaw tightened, his eyes turning sharp and cold as he flung the report toward me. This is my child. It is not, I shouted back. In the quiet restaurant, we faced off without moving, locked in silent confrontation. The air was oppressive to the extreme. The one who calmed down first was me. Berlin, didn't the doctor tell you that after aborting that child, it would be very difficult for me to ever get pregnant again? His face was icy. But you are pregnant right now. That's because my husband is a doctor. I cut him off, my eyes reddening completely. Berlin, every single time after we slept together, I took birth control. That night was no exception. You would never allow an illegitimate child to exist, would you? But Berlin, what are you doing right now? Those questions struck his reason like heavy blows. Yes. What was he doing? in the coffee-stained, chaotic restaurant. I stood there with my hair soaked through, looking at him almost pleadingly, calling his name, Berlin. I'm begging you, all right? Every emotion in my eyes, he saw them all, saw them so clearly it made his heart palpitate. But this plea wasn't asking him to believe me. I said, Berlin, let me go. Those words fell into his ears. It was as if someone suddenly clenched his heart. An inexplicable ache spread from his chest. Chapter 13. London's winter really is unbearably cold. My soaked clothes clung to my body, as if freezing my organs to the core. I pulled my expensive black coat tighter around myself, couldn't help sneezing a few times, and quickened my pace. It wasn't far from my home, and today just happened to be the day my husband's flight landed. After being away for over half a month, he was finally coming back. I touched my belly and let out a deep breath. The baby inside had been very well behaved. Even after my emotions had spiraled so violently earlier, it never stirred. As I walked, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. I'd still been too kind just now. The coffee I threw at Ondine had only been warm, and I'd aimed only for her face. But that glass of ice water had drenched me from head to toe. It really wasn't fair. Behind me, Berlin followed at a short distance, silent yet persistent. He had offered to drive me home, but I refused. You'd be better off checking whether the test samples were switched. Assistant Lynn and Ondine both handled them. I also deserve an explanation. With his power and wealth, that wouldn't be difficult at all. I am absolutely certain this is my husband's child. He didn't respond, only stared at my pregnant belly. Right now, it was only a slight curve, barely noticeable, yet to him it was blindingly unpleasant, stirring a fierce sense of rejection and irritation deep in his chest. Even stronger than when I had been pregnant years ago. In truth, he had already vaguely foreseen the test result, because I had no reason to lie. But he resisted thinking about it, resisted accepting it. His gaze fell on the plain ring on my ring finger. He stared at it for a very long time, so long that his eyes reddened. When he finally spoke again, his voice was hoarse. You bought that ring yourself, didn't you? Abroad, single men and women often buy rings to wear themselves, just to deter unwanted advances. The question itself was filled with self-deception, a last-ditch gamble. The answer was painfully obvious, yet he still hoped I would nod, as if, as long as I did, everything that had happened in the past 3 months could vanish without a trace. As if I would still be Melissa, the Melissa who stayed by his side for 10 long years, who would never leave unless he said so. Even the child in my belly could be treated as a final gift from the last night we slept together before I left. He thought he wouldn't mind raising an illegitimate child, but I only smiled, almost cruelly, and said, my husband drafted it himself and spent a full month designing it. Mr. Law, we are very compatible, very much in love, and we're about to welcome a child that belongs to us. That last shred of humble hope was completely extinguished. He let out a self-mocking laugh, at a loss for words. When he lowered his head, his eyes reddened for no reason. Just 3 months. It had only been 3 months, so why wouldn't fate even grant him a little time to react? Chapter 13. 2 lines of footprints stretched through the snow, deep and shallow. When I reached my front door, I took off the coat I was wearing in front of the man behind me and tossed it straight into the trash. I was certain he didn't lack a coat, and this would also spare us any back and forth contact. He had thrown away a coat worth tens of thousands before, too. That night had also been a snowy one like this. The deal I was negotiating then had been difficult. I was forced to drink far too much, and I ended up grabbing the lapel of his coat and vomiting all over him. Perhaps because the deal was successfully closed and he was in a good mood, he casually discarded that soiled, expensive coat and cleanly scooped me up in his arms. I don't remember whether I was truly drunk that night. I only remember that the moon was especially full. His heartbeat was steady, and snow fell onto his long lashes, so beautiful it was impossible to look away. The snow that night was truly cold. In my haze, I rubbed against the warmth of his chest, greedily wishing that road could stretch on a little longer. And at the same time, I was very clear about one thing. Warmth in winter is indeed something people grow attached to. But you can't, because of that small attachment, willingly trap yourself in an entire winter. Just as I was about to go inside, The man behind me suddenly called out. His eyes were silently rimmed with red. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse and strained, his expression dazed. If I had been willing to let that child stay back then, I cut him off. I wouldn't have been willing. I spoke slowly, carefully, word by word. Berlin, I will only ever have a normal family. Raise a child that belongs to me and the person I love, not an illegitimate child who's looked down on and can never stand in the light. I never once thought about keeping that child. Not for a second. His heart was stabbed viciously. The raw, bleeding pain spreading through his limbs. Tears suddenly fell from his reddened eyes. Back then, he clearly hadn't felt much about that child at all. So why was it that now? Just thinking about it made breathing difficult. Made his heart ache beyond control? Chapter 14. Later, the test results came out. The child in my womb was indeed not his. Undine never appeared again after that night. I knew the system had judged her long-awaited reunion mission a failure and sent her back to her original world. After experiencing such extravagance and splendor, how could she willingly return to an ordinary, unfaithful husband and a life of poverty? The immense psychological torment left her teetering on the edge of collapse day after day. As for Assistant Lin, who had taken money to do the job, he was swiftly dismissed, and no company ever dared to hire him again, even after following Berlin for so many years. Berlin showed no mercy. He had always been that kind of cold-blooded, ruthless man. At the very end of winter, Berlin came to see me one last time. He chose the same restaurant as before. When he was about to pour me a drink, I reached out and stopped him. "It's fruit wine," he said, staring at me. His voice was inexplicably hoarse. "Low alcohol. It won't affect the baby." I pressed my lips together and smiled lightly, telling him with a candor I'd never had before. "Mr. Law, I don't like drinking. I never did. It was life that forced me onto the path of being a drinking companion." He froze. After a long moment, it seemed he finally truly heard it. Even after walking together for 10 years, he still didn't know that. Just like him, I didn't enjoy alcohol at all. After the meal, he still insisted on taking me home. Just as I was about to step inside, he called out to me in the heavy snowfall, "Melissa, did you ever love me?" A man once so proud and aloof had actually asked such a cliché question. Through the howling wind and drifting snow, I turned back to look at him. I blinked hard. I knew he was sharp-tongued, cold, and selfish. Yet I couldn't deny that every major change in my life had involved him. From a nightclub hostess with only a high school education to a university graduate from a prestigious school. From a damp basement to a bright luxury apartment with a law view. From timid and self-abased to brave and gentle. From a girl into an adult. When I first came to Kyoto alone, I had to endure everything by myself. Later, a single casual "what's wrong?" from him was enough to smooth over all my troubles. The name Berlin had been etched into my bones long ago. He changed my life, pulled me out of the mud and let me see a broader world. He also gave me confidence, letting me know that as long as I spoke his name, no one dared bully me. At the same time, he gave me the most painful lesson of all, that moth-to-flame love leads nowhere. At 20, I used the most trite metaphor and called him the light that redeemed me. At 30, standing here now, I would still say the same. Berlin was the light that changed my life, but I was even clearer that this light was never my destination. So when his goddess returned, I chose to step aside without hesitation. I hoped that the light which had pulled me out of the mire could finally embrace the light he had waited for all these years. Even though it all ended up ruined, that wasn't my fault. It was at that moment that I felt the velvet box in my pocket. I didn't know when he had slipped it in. I didn't even look at it. I threw it, box and all, into the snow at his feet. By now, whether there was love or not was a meaningless question, and I was no longer the girl who needed to rely on someone else's light to survive. Warm lights glowed inside the house. My husband was cooking for me. Step by step, I walked toward my spring. Extra Berlin's POV. Chapter 1. The first time I met Melissa was in a neon-lit nightclub. I don't like discussing business in places like that, too noisy. Loud enough to give you a headache. But since it was a partner's enthusiastic invitation, there was no reason to offend them. That year she was probably just 20, yet already a seasoned hand in the nightlife scene, wearing the most revealing dress, putting on dazzling makeup, She knew exactly how to please the guests. Her face was strikingly beautiful and delicate, yet her eyes were round almond-shaped ones. And when she smiled, dimples appeared. It was the first time in several years that I thought of Ondine. Two people who were worlds apart. Yet in the instant she poured the wine, I saw a similarity. She could really drink. Her voice was soft, her words sweet, teasing those executives into roaring with laughter, even in such a high-end nightclub filled with beauties. She still stood out, bright and eye-catching, so I remembered her. Chapter 2. At that time, my company was in a period of transition, and there were drinking engagements almost every day. I enjoy tasting wine, but I don't enjoy pouring alcohol into myself mindlessly. Like drinking water. Most of the women around me couldn't handle their liquor. So naturally, I thought of her. 30,000 per time. To drink on my behalf. That was far more than what she earned at the nightclub. So she worked very hard. At the table, no matter what kind of alcohol it was, she could pick it up and pour it straight down her throat without hesitation. Other female companions, once drunk, might stagger around, or take advantage of their drunkenness to cling to me, but she would only sit beside me, cheeks flushed pink, eyes sparkling. She wouldn't touch me, very well behaved. The conversations at the table were dull, so she would often drift off, staring at the wine in front of her in a daze. But if someone teased her, she would smile softly, showing a hint of shy embarrassment. Not boring. So every time there was a drinking engagement, she was the first person I thought of. Later, after she had stayed by my side for a long time, even the slightest, almost imperceptible frown from me was enough for her to know what I was thinking. Often, when I was fed up with the conversation, my patience nearly exhausted, yet it wasn't convenient to leave outright. She would wrap an arm around my neck, understanding perfectly, make a bit of a scene, and insist on leaving. She suited my tastes very well, so I was also willing to help her deal with some troubles, including loan sharks sent to collect debts, troublesome customers in the nightclub, and that damp, cramped basement. Later, she told me, half drunk, that I was her light and her salvation. I found it amusing. Salvation should be given willingly, with no ulterior motives. Not someone like me, a profit-driven businessman. Chapter 3. There were always many women by my side. Some were there for the sake of business cooperation. Some were introductions arranged by my family. But most of them never stayed longer than 3 months. Even I found it strange that I could tolerate her remaining by my side for so long. Naturally, that also brought many unfriendly looks directed at her. After leaving the nightclub, she would occasionally take on small web dramas to earn some extra money. That time, when I returned from a business trip in Europe, she was once again covered in bruises, patches of green and purple. I heard that it happened to be her turn when the wire rig malfunctioned. I let out a soft scoff. Being schemed against so many times in a single month, both openly and covertly, she was quite capable of enduring it, still coming over to serve me proactively despite the injuries all over her body. She kept biting her lip, refusing to let herself moan. We hadn't gone on for long before I lost interest. I simply lit a cigarette and told her to accompany me to a banquet the next night. She had only ever accompanied me to drinking engagements before, so those people naturally regarded her as a plaything that could be summoned at will. It wasn't until she entered that extremely high-profile banquet on my arm, as my female companion, that the unspeakable thoughts in their minds gradually died down. After I dealt with the people who had been tripping her up, I casually told her, "With my name over your head, you can be as reckless as you like. Otherwise, it's my face you're disgracing." She wrapped her arms around me, said yes, cheeks flushed red as she leaned in to kiss me. I don't resist kissing. Occasionally, when she was sick and uncomfortable, I was also willing to pull her into my arms and kiss her. At first, it was just light, tentative pecks. Later, I came to prefer deep kisses, stealing away her last breath of air, watching tears well up in her almond-shaped eyes, her cheeks trembling and reddening, until she could only cling to my neck, whimpering softly, pleading with me with the most tender expression. Chapter 4. I naturally claimed her as part of my territory, categorizing her as something that belonged to me. So when I first saw her kissing the male lead in a low-budget web drama, a subtle sense of displeasure rose in my heart. I was unwilling to admit that it was jealousy. I simply felt disgust at my possession being tainted with someone else's scent. In my view, possessiveness is an instinct engraved in a male's bones, not an expression of emotion. She probably knew that I was unhappy. So after that, she no longer accepted intimate scenes. She had always done that very well. From beginning to end, she was obedient, well-behaved, and compliant. The only time she ever defied me was that one matter, the accidental pregnancy and her intention to keep the child. I had never imagined she would be so bold, so I threw her out into the snow to reflect properly, telling her to come back only after she had thought it through. That night, I didn't close the villa door tightly, but she stubbornly endured the entire night outside. I thought she was going to oppose me outright, but the next day, with eyes red and swollen, she unexpectedly compromised. Friends at the time were all trying to persuade me, it's just a child. Is it really necessary to make such a fuss? There were plenty of sordid affairs in our circle. Several prominent big shots even had illegitimate children hidden overseas. But I simply found it troublesome and unnecessary. Back then, in order to inherit the family assets smoothly, I had fought for years with my father's illegitimate children. I loathed their status, and therefore would never allow myself to have such a child. Someone joked, "Then why don't you marry Melissa? That way the child wouldn't be illegitimate. She's been with you for 6 years. This is the first woman who's stayed by your side for so long." Berlin. Dare you say you don't feel even a little moved? I said nothing, but inwardly found it amusing. I had merely found her pleasing to the eye and kept her around for a couple of extra years. Yet time had become their standard for judging whether feelings were involved. So, in the 7th year, I decided to part ways with her. Chapter 5. My family chose a suitable partner for a strategic marriage. If nothing unexpected happened, I would enter marriage with someone of equal standing, someone who could bring me tangible benefits. But on the night before the wedding, that wealthy heiress ran away to pursue her own love. I found it absurd, and at the same time, relieving. I never give a woman a second chance to be associated with me, but I gave Melissa two. The first time was when she had just had the abortion, lying pale on the hospital bed, yet still forcing a smile at me. At that moment, I thought she had received the lesson she deserved, and that I could reluctantly forgive her, so I allowed her to stay by my side for 1 more year. The second time was now. During the half year we were out of contact, 6 months in total. I spent 3 months preparing for the wedding, and 3 months thinking of her for no apparent reason, but I would never take the initiative to look for her. Later, by chance, I saw her at a restaurant. She was on a blind date with the man across from her, smiling brightly, eyes curved as she spoke about her hopes for the future. I took a few extra looks without drawing attention to myself, but didn't go over. For several nights afterward, lying in bed, I kept thinking of that dazzling, almost blinding smile of hers. The irritation in my chest lingered, clogged there for days. I have never been someone excessively harsh on myself. Facing one's desires head-on was the first lesson I learned after entering the business world. So I had my assistant call her and ask her to come over. She rarely came to my place. After a thoroughly satisfying bout of intimacy, I came out of the shower and saw her applying the body lotion she had brought with her. The rich scent of roses filled my cold, quiet bedroom. I lit a cigarette and leaned lazily against the balcony, watching her. Long, smooth hair, fair skin and a slender waist. Delicate and alluring. She was still wearing the necklace I had chosen for her, dressed in a matching bathrobe with mine. This was a rose I had personally cultivated. A hidden possessiveness began to grow in my chest. At last, I was willing to admit it, I was jealous. She could only belong to me. When she was about to put her things back into her bag, I stubbed out the cigarette, walked over, wrapped an arm around her, and kissed her, speaking casually. "Leave them." Those bottles and jars that belonged to her landed, for the first time, solidly on my dark rosewood table, in 7 years. This was the first time I tacitly allowed her to step into my life. Chapter 6. After that, we entered the following year with unspoken understanding. There were no other women by my side anymore, only her. Even my usually carefree, cynical friends couldn't help teasing me, asking when they would finally get to drink at my wedding. I let out a cold scoff and ignored them. I could keep supporting her, But I would not marry her. I had said it before. I am a profit-first businessman. If there was ever a moment when I truly considered that question, it was probably one Mid-Autumn festival. At exactly midnight, I reached over and found the space beside me empty. I got up and searched around, only to discover her downstairs in the living room, gnawing on a piece of bread. After being spotted by me, she looked a little embarrassed and asked if I wanted some too. It's hard to describe how I felt at that moment, somewhere between amusement and helplessness. Even the cold, indifferent mask I usually wore seemed to melt a little. I went into the kitchen and cooked pasta for her. The last time I had cooked was back when I was studying abroad. Despite the long gap and slightly rusty hands, the result was satisfactory. The living room was spacious and quiet, while outside, traffic flowed endlessly. The soft glow of the wall lamps fell gently onto her hair, outlining her long, fair neck, half concealing the ambiguous kiss marks on her chest. Suddenly, fireworks exploded outside. She lifted her eyes with a bright smile and said to me, "Mr. Law, happy Mid-Autumn Festival." It was at that very moment that the thought suddenly occurred to me. Living like this didn't seem so bad after all. Chapter 7. But our relationship still came to an end in the 10th year. A girl who had almost faded from my memory came back. Everyone said she was my goddess. I didn't deny it. During the 2 most isolated years of high school, it was indeed she who stayed by my side, giving me something to hold on to. The night I sent Melissa away happened to be the same night Ondine's plane landed. At that time, I was thinking, she had been with me for 10 years. No matter what she asked for, I thought I would agree. But she merely curved her lips into a smile, even as tears kept falling and she was clearly in deep pain. She told me, "I don't want anything. I only hope that Mr. Law can be truly happy." If I had heard something so foolish at a drinking table, I would certainly have let out a light scoff or two. As a kept lover, suddenly claiming to want nothing at the moment, she could have taken a huge payout. Either she was pretending to be noble, or she was angling for something bigger. Yet at that instant, I clearly felt an unfamiliar emotion rising in my chest. After Melissa left, the place by my side was naturally taken by Ondine. She often talked to me about high school. If you counted carefully, we had only known each other for about 2 years. Yet she always had countless little, fragmented memories. As for that period of my life, my recollection had already grown vague. I only remembered that I had once liked her. When she left back then, perhaps I had been heartbroken, but now, looking at her again, I felt nothing at all, because I had once promised, in my youth, to celebrate her birthday with her. I went into the kitchen and cooked her some noodles. She hovered around me and asked in a coquettish tone, "Am I the first person to eat the noodles you made?" I don't understand why women are always so fixated on things like the first time. Just as I don't know what kind of evasive answer the person asking such questions actually wants to hear. Am I the first person you shaved for? Am I the first person to enter your bedroom? Am I the first person to sit in your passenger seat? No, in reality, all of those firsts belong to someone else. She had too many questions, very annoying. It's already been more than 10 years. Ondine, I reminded her calmly. She blinked, her eyes reddening slightly, and said in a light tone, "I know, I didn't realize so much time had passed. I had already walked 1/3 of my life's path, and I had spent a long, full 10 years with another woman. How could I possibly remember only those 2 years of high school? When I was young, I had promised that I would marry her, but now, I wasn't sure anymore." Chapter 8. From time to time, I would think of Melissa, alone overseas. Unable to cook, I wondered whether she could adapt. But I had left her a lot of money. It should be enough for her to hire someone to cook for her. I didn't know why I thought of her so frequently. I attributed it to habit, to a normal withdrawal reaction. I would never take the initiative to look for her, because I would not give a woman a third chance to be associated with me. She had followed me for 10 years. That was long enough. 3 months later, because of a business collaboration, I boarded a plane to London. I had considered the possibility of running into her, but I had no particular desire to see her. Until I stood by a floor-to-ceiling window and let my gaze fall. I saw her, her belly slightly rounded, flipping through her prenatal checkup report as she walked out of the hospital. In that instant, I was so furious that I laughed instead. 10 years. And she still hadn't fully understood my rules. Children were always the stupidest and greediest means. Perhaps the lesson back then hadn't been harsh enough. To make her think she could use the same method again, with a mocking expression. I tossed a card to Assistant Lin and told him to pass on a message. You contact her unilaterally. Don't give her any way to reach me. If she asks, tell her I'm getting married. I wanted to use marriage as an excuse to cut off all her thoughts. I didn't want to give her any chance to reconnect with me, or to mistakenly believe that there was still room for reconciliation. I have always been ruthless when it comes to cutting off the past. I stood by the window, watching London's first snowfall of the year and watching her reaction. But her expression remained calm from beginning to end. No panic. No pallor. This was not within my expectations. She should have, at least, shown a trace of panic. After all, she knew best what I was most wary of. This time, no matter how obsessed she was with the child she had aborted back then, no matter how she pleaded with me, I would not soften my heart. The brutal outcome of that incident had not been my intention, but rules were rules. If she violated them, she had to bear the consequences, and this time was no different. Chapter 9. Assistant Lin brought back her reply. She said the child was hers and her husband's. Husband. That word was like a tiny thorn, piercing straight into my eardrum. I found it laughable. She was getting more and more skilled at making up lies now. The vague restlessness in my chest sank into something heavier and darker. Later, I ran into her at the hospital. I couldn't help but mock her with biting words. Yet she remained gentle and composed the whole time, looking at me with those misty, water-veiled eyes, and asked softly, Berlin, why won't you believe me? Should I believe her? But I won't deny this. When I saw her tears, I compromised. I could wait for the test results to come out, and then nail her firmly to the pillar of shame, leaving her with no room to argue back, because I was absolutely certain that the child was mine. That night, the last time we slept together, I hadn't used protection. She was exhausted and slept until after 10. After meeting Ondine, I rushed off to catch a flight. Whether judging by timing or motive, I naturally concluded that the child was mine. So when Ondine sent me that report showing the parent-child relationship, the anger I had been suppressing finally found a more direct outlet. I wanted to see how she would continue to argue. I used ice water to calm her down. When it comes to disciplining disobedient people, I have never been soft-hearted. But when she lifted her head, tears mixed with icy water sliding down her face, looking at me with that broken yet stubborn gaze, when she counted, one by one, all those past moments, red-eyed as she questioned why I would treat her like this, the fingers gripping the rim of the glass went faintly numb, because every word she said, every sentence, left me unable to refute her. All those years by my side, she had been obedient, compliant, flawless. There was nothing to fault. The only time she had been disobedient was that secret pregnancy. Her trembling voice pulled my rationality back. A strange, unfamiliar emotion, something akin to guilt, swept through me in an instant. She asked me, when a single paternity test could have settled everything. Why did I have to force her into such an impossible position, where she couldn't even prove herself? My gaze fell on her drenched hair tips and her bloodless face. It felt as though countless fine needles were piercing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I rarely give people a second chance, yet I was always making exceptions for her. Chapter 10. I replaced my assistant and had him bring me a second paternity test report. In a relieved, almost joyful tone, he said, President Law, the child is not yours. He waited for my response, but all he saw was my frozen figure. Tentatively, he placed the report into my hand. Outside the window was London's gray, overcast sky. I stared at those few bold words again and again. The joints of my fingers turned faintly white from the force of my grip. Not mine. That realization was like cold air, an extreme, icy stillness closing in on me from all directions. So she left for 3 months, quickly got married, and became pregnant with another man's child. An indescribable taste spread through my mouth. Bitter, absurd, and with a hint of sharp pain. So she really could turn around that decisively, walk into a life without me, even nurturing a new life that had nothing to do with me. Then what were my anger these past few days? My suspicions, And those irritations and moments of losing control that even I couldn't understand? A complete joke, born entirely of my own self-delusion? I suddenly thought of the child I had once forced her to abort. That had been a child that belonged to me, my child. A dull yet piercing pain suddenly surged in my chest. The hand holding the cigarette trembled slightly. I had always believed myself to be a very calm person, and I began to sort through my thoughts from back then. Why had I not wanted it? Because it was troublesome? Because of rules? Because I thought she wasn't qualified? Or because I was convinced that my future would only ever allow for a legitimate heir? I had been thriving in the business world since I was 20, and I had rarely made wrong decisions. Yet about this matter, I felt a trace of regret, sharp and undeniable. All my thoughts were thrown into chaos by the report in front of me. She already had another man's child. She was protecting another man's child with such determination. That contrast, that gap, stuck in my throat like a bone, nearly suffocating me. At last, I realized. I seemed to have lost her. Not 3 months ago, when she left me and flew to a foreign country, but much earlier, at some unknown moment. The moment I ordered her to abort that child. Chapter 11. Using an apology as an excuse. We met one last time. I chose that restaurant, the one where things had once gone badly, and deliberately picked a seat by the window. Outside was London's familiar gloomy sky, gray and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Her pregnancy was obvious now. Her complexion good. She raised her hand to stop me when I tried to pour her a drink. It's fruit wine. The alcohol content is low. I tried to make my tone sound natural, half an explanation, half a pale justification for those 10 years of mine. But she told me she didn't like drinking. That was not an answer I had expected. My throat felt dry as I wanted to ask why she had never told me. Yet I remembered that it was precisely through glass after glass of alcohol that she had stayed by my side, and those choices had never really been hers to make. When she went to the restroom, I slipped the ring, one I had bought at great cost at an auction, into the pocket of her coat. I thought that was what I owed her. The meal tasted like nothing. When it ended, I insisted on walking her back. Snow had started falling again, not heavy, but fine and dense, dampening our shoulders. We walked in silence along the road I had once followed behind her. This time, I knew it was the end of our 10 years. That question which had circled in my heart for so long, which I had once believed I would never ask, so trite, yet so deadly, still burst from my mouth. Melissa, did you ever love me? The moment the words left my lips, I regretted them. This wasn't like me. It was ugly, too humble, too desperate. Yet I stared at her, unblinking, my heart suspended as if in midair. She didn't answer right away. That brief silence felt like an entire century. I watched her take out the velvet box from her pocket. Without even looking at it, she tossed it straight back into the snow at my feet. Clean, decisive, without the slightest trace of reluctance. The answer needed no words. I used to not understand why people described someone they loved but could never have with something as vulgar as a red rose, until I stood on a snow-covered street, watching a red rose being bought by another man. My eyes reddened, my knuckles whitening, as I hurled the box containing the ring away with all my strength. I thought, in this lifetime, I would probably never have a child again.